backrooms of Blackwood Lab. The town of Blackwood was nestled in a dense forest, its origins dating back to the early 1800s, when a group of settlers, led by a man named Ezekiel Blackwood, established a small logging community. The town grew slowly over the decades, its economy tied to the timber industry. By the mid-20th century, Blackwood had become a quiet, unremarkable place, the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and nothing exciting ever happened. Blackwood High School was the heart of the town, a modest building with a proud history. The school's athletic teams, known as the Blackwood Bears, were a source of local pride. The football team had won the state championship in 1978, a victory that was still celebrated with an annual parade. The swim team, too, had a storied past, producing several state champions over the years. The school's indoor pool, built in the 1960s, was one of the few modern amenities in the otherwise outdated facility. For Jake, Mia, and Lucas, Blackwood High was both a sanctuary and a prison. Jake was the star quarterback, a role that came with its own set of pressures. His dad had been a local legend, leading the Bears to their championship victory, and Jake was expected to live up to that legacy. But Jake had little interest in football. He only played to keep his mom off his back. Mia was a member of the swim team, though she often felt out of place among her more competitive teammates. She loved the water, but the constant pressure to perform left her drained. Her parents, both former athletes themselves, had high expectations, and Mia often felt like she was drowning under the weight of their ambitions. Lucas was the wild card, the kid who never quite fit in. He had tried out for the football team but was cut after the first practice. Instead, he spent his time tinkering with his car or exploring the woods around Blackwood, always looking for something more exciting than the town could offer. The three of them had been friends since middle school, bonded by their shared disdain for Blackwood and their longing for something more. So when Jake suggested skipping school to explore the abandoned Blackwood research facility, it didn't take much convincing. The Blackwood research facility had been the subject of countless urban legends and ghost stories. Built in the 1950s, it was rumored to have been a site for secret government experiments, everything from mind control to interdimensional portals. The official story was that it had been shut down due to budget cuts, but the townsfolk had their own theories. Some said the scientists had gone mad, conducting unethical experiments on human subjects. Others claimed the facility was haunted by the ghosts of those who had died there. The most chilling story was about a group of teenagers who had broken into the lab in the 1980s and never came out. Their bodies were never found, but locals claimed to hear their voices echoing from the woods near the facility. Mia had heard the stories from her older brother, who swore they were true. "That place is cursed," he'd told her. "If you go in, you might not come out." But to Jake, Lucas, and even Mia, the stories only made the lab more enticing. It was the perfect place to prove they weren't afraid of anything. The facility loomed in the distance as they approached, its broken windows and crumbling walls giving it an air of menace. The chain-link fence surrounding the property was rusted and sagging, and they easily found a gap to squeeze through. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The walls were covered in graffiti, and the floors were littered with broken glass and debris. They wandered through empty offices and labs, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Jake kicked over a chair, laughing as it clattered to the ground. Lucas picked up a beaker and hurled it against the wall, the sound of shattering glass breaking the stillness. "Guys, maybe we shouldn't break stuff," Mia said nervously, her voice barely above a whisper. "What if someone hears us?" "Relax, Mia," Jake said, grinning. "No one's been here in years. We're fine." But as they ventured deeper into the facility, the atmosphere grew heavier. The hum of electricity buzzed in the air, though the power had supposedly been cut decades ago. The graffiti on the walls became more unsettling. Strange symbols and phrases like, "Don't trust them," and "They're watching." Then they found the basement. The basement. The door to the basement was partially open, the darkness beyond seeming to swallow the light. Jake hesitated for a moment, then pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam of light revealed a steep staircase leading down into the shadows. "Let's check it out," Lucas said, his voice filled with excitement. Mia shook her head, but Jake nodded, and they began their descent. At the bottom of the stairs, they found a massive metal door, its surface covered in rust and strange markings. It was slightly ajar, and a faint, pulsating glow emanated from within. The hum was louder here, vibrating in their chests. Jake pushed the door open, revealing a room filled with outdated machinery and a glowing, circular structure in the center. The air around it shimmered, and the hum grew louder. "What the hell is that?" Mia whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas stepped closer, his eyes wide with curiosity. "It's like a wormhole or something. Cool." Before anyone could stop him, he reached out to touch the glowing surface. In an instant, the portal seemed to lurch, and Lucas was pulled in with a startled yelp. The light flared, and then he was gone. Lucas tumbled through the void, his stomach lurching as if he were falling and floating at the same time. When he landed, it wasn't on the cold concrete of the basement, but on a damp, musty carpet. He looked around, disoriented. The room he was in was eerily familiar, yet alien. Endless yellow-walled corridors lit by flickering fluorescent lights. The air was stale, and the hum he'd heard in the basement was now a constant, oppressive drone. "Jake? Mia?" he called out, his voice echoing unnaturally. No response. Panic set in as he realized he was alone. The corridors seemed to stretch on forever, with no doors or windows, just the same monotonous yellow walls and buzzing lights. He started walking, his footsteps muffled by the carpet. But no matter how far he went, nothing changed. Hours passed, or was it minutes? Time felt distorted. His initial curiosity turned to dread as the reality of his situation sank in. He was trapped in a place that defied logic, a labyrinth with no exit. His breathing grew shallow and his heart pounded in his chest. Every corner he turned looked the same, and the hum seemed to grow louder, pressing against his skull. Then he heard it, a faint shuffling sound like footsteps just out of sight. He froze, his blood running cold. "Hello?" he whispered, his voice trembling. There was no reply, but he felt it, a presence, something watching him. He broke into a run, his sneakers slapping against the carpet, but the sound followed him, always just behind. As the hours dragged on, exhaustion and dehydration took their toll. His throat was parched and his vision blurred. He began to see things, shadows moving in the corners of his eyes, figures that vanished when he turned to look. The hum became a cacophony, and the walls seemed to close in around him. He collapsed to the ground, his mind teetering on the edge of madness. "I'm going to die here," he thought, tears streaming down his face. He curled up on the floor, the hum lulling him into a fitful sleep. When Lucas woke up, he wasn't alone. 3 figures stood over him, their faces gaunt and their clothes torn. They looked like teenagers, but their eyes were hollow, their expressions haunted. Who are you?" Lucas croaked, his voice barely audible. One of them, a girl with matted hair and a tattered sweater, knelt beside him. "We're like you," she said softly. "We got pulled in here years ago. We don't even know how long it's been." Lucas stared at them, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. "Years, but I was only here for a few hours." The girl shook her head. "Time doesn't work the same here. It's like It's like this place eats it. We've been trying to survive, but it's hard. There's something else here with us. It watches us. It chases us. Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. What is it? We don't know, another boy said, his voice trembling. We've never seen it, not clearly, but it's always there, just out of sight. If it catches you... He trailed off, his eyes darting nervously to the shadows. The third teenager, a boy with a scar running down his cheek, handed Lucas a bottle of water. You need to stay strong, he said. We'll help you, but you have to be careful. It's always watching. The girl introduced herself as Sarah. She had been a high school senior in 1985, obsessed with the band The Cure, and spending her weekends at the local arcade playing Pac-Man and Donkey Kong. She had been the quiet, artistic type, much like Mia, and had been drawn to the lab out of curiosity after hearing the rumors. Her parents had reported her missing, but no one had ever found a trace of her. The boy with the scar was Mark. He had been the class clown, always cracking jokes and pulling pranks. He loved heavy metal bands like Metallica and Iron Maiden and had a knack for fixing cars. Mark had been dared to break into the lab by his friends, but when he went in, he never came back out. His disappearance had been a local mystery for years. The third teenager, a boy named Danny, had been the brainy one. He was into science fiction and had dreams of becoming an astronaut. He was a huge fan of Star Wars and spent hours playing Dungeons and Dragons with his friends. Danny had been the one to suggest exploring the lab, convinced that the rumors of secret experiments were true. He had been the first to touch the portal, and the others had followed, thinking it was just another one of his wild ideas. As Lucas spent more time with Sarah, Mark, and Danny, they began to ask him questions about the outside world. They were desperate for any news, any connection to the life they had left behind. "What year is it?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling with hope and fear. 2023, Lucas replied, watching as their faces filled with shock and disbelief. 2023, Mark repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "We've been here for decades." Lucas nodded, feeling a pang of sadness for them. They had been trapped in this endless maze for longer than he had been alive. "Who won the championship this year?" Danny asked, his eyes filled with a mixture of curiosity and longing. "The Bears haven't won since 1978, Lucas said, watching as their faces fell. "But they're still trying. The town still believes in them." Sarah reached out, her hand trembling as she touched Lucas's phone. "What is this?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "It's a phone," Lucas explained, showing her how it worked. "You can use it to call people, take pictures, play games." Sarah's eyes widened as she looked at the screen, her fingers brushing against the glass. "It's so advanced," she whispered. "We had nothing like this when we left." Lucas felt a lump in his throat as he realized just how much they had missed. They had been trapped in this place, cut off from the world, while time had moved on without them. Survival in the backrooms. One day, as they sat in a dimly lit corridor, Lucas asked the question that had been nagging at him. "How do you survive here? Where do you get food and water?" Sarah sighed, her expression weary. "It's not easy. We find food in odd places, sometimes in empty rooms, sometimes just lying in the hallways, but it's never much. Just cans with plain labels. No brands, no logos, just the word beans or water." Mark nodded, his voice bitter. "We have to walk for hours sometimes just to find one can, and even then, it's never enough. We're always hungry, always thirsty." Danny added, "The water's the same, just plain bottles with water written on them. No expiration dates, nothing. It's like this place, provides just enough to keep us alive. But no more." Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The idea of surviving on such meager rations in a place that seemed designed to torment them was horrifying. He couldn't imagine how they had endured it for so long. One day, as they wandered the endless corridors, the hum suddenly grew louder, more intense. The air seemed to thicken, and the lights flickered ominously. Sarah grabbed Lucas's arm, her eyes wide with fear. "It's here," she whispered. "It's coming." Before Lucas could respond, a low, guttural growl echoed through the corridor. The sound sent a shiver down his spine, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The others were already moving, their movements frantic and panicked. "Run!" Mark shouted, his voice filled with terror. Lucas didn't need to be told twice. He took off after them, his heart pounding in his chest. The growl grew louder, closer, and he could feel the presence behind him, something massive and malevolent. He didn't dare look back. They turned corner after corner, the corridors blurring together in a maze of yellow walls and flickering lights. The entity was relentless, its footsteps heavy and deliberate. Lucas's lungs burned, and his legs felt like they were made of lead, but he kept running, driven by sheer terror. Just when he thought he couldn't go any further, they rounded a corner and saw it, a faint, pulsating glow in the distance. The portal. "There!" Danny shouted, his voice filled with hope. "We have to reach it." They sprinted toward the glow, the entity close behind. Lucas could feel its breath on his neck, hot and rancid. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the shimmering surface of the portal. For a moment he hesitated, fear and uncertainty gripping him. Then he felt a hand grab his shoulder. He turned to see Mark, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. "Tell them we're still here," he said. "Tell them we're waiting." Then Lucas was pulled into the light. When he woke up, he was back in the basement of the Blackwood facility. Jake and Mia were kneeling beside him, their faces pale with worry. "Dude, you scared the hell out of us," Jake exclaimed. "You just passed out or something. Are you okay?" Lucas blinked, disoriented. I was gone for days," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "I was in this place, yellow walls, endless hallways. I thought I'd never get out." Mia frowned. "You were only out for, like, a minute. Are you sure you're okay?" Lucas looked at his hands, still trembling. He could still hear the hum, faint but persistent, in the back of his mind. "I don't know," he said quietly, "but I don't think I'll ever forget it." In the days that followed, Lucas tried to explain what had happened to him. He told Jake and Mia about the endless corridors, the hum, and the other teenagers, Sarah, Mark, and Danny. He described the entity that had chased them, the fear that had gripped him, and the portal that had brought him back. But no one believed him. Jake laughed it off, saying Lucas must have hit his head when he passed out. Mia looked at him with concern, suggesting he might have had a vivid dream or a hallucination. Even the adults he tried to tell, his parents, his teachers, the local police, dismissed his story as the product of an overactive imagination. "Those kids went missing decades ago," the police chief said, shaking his head. "There's no way you could have seen them. It's just not possible." The questions. Lucas tried to piece it all together. If the backrooms were real, if Sarah, Mark, and Danny were still trapped there, how could he help them? He thought about the portal, the hum, the entity. He thought about the way time seemed to stretch and warp in that place. Could it be that the missing teenagers were still alive, trapped in some kind of timeless void? Lucas felt more alone than ever. He couldn't shake the feeling that he had left something, or someone, behind. The guilt gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. He would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the hum of the back rooms echoing in his mind. Lucas wanted to scream, to make them understand, but he knew it was no use. The more he tried to explain, the more they looked at him like he was crazy. Eventually, he stopped talking about it altogether, but the experience stayed with him, haunting his thoughts and his dreams. He couldn't stop thinking about Sarah, Mark, and Danny. Were they still out there, trapped in that endless maze, running from the entity that hunted them? Or had it all been in his head, a figment of his imagination brought on by stress and fear? As time passed, Lucas began to doubt his own memories. Maybe Jake and Mia were right. Maybe it had all been a dream. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real, that the back rooms were still there, waiting, just beyond the edge of reality. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, he swore he could still hear the hum. But determined to find answers, Lucas began to investigate the missing teenagers. He visited the local library, scouring old newspapers and yearbooks for information about Sarah, Mark, and Danny. What he found sent chills down his spine. The descriptions matched perfectly. Sarah had been a senior in 1985, just as she had told him. She had been wearing a sweater and jeans when she disappeared, the same clothes Lucas had seen her in. Mark had been the class clown, known for his love of heavy metal and his knack for fixing cars. Danny had been the brainy one, obsessed with science fiction and Dungeons and Dragons. Even the details about their personalities and interests were the same. Lucas couldn't explain how he had known these things. He had never heard of the missing teenagers before his experience in the back rooms, and yet he had described them perfectly. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that his experience had been real. But how could he prove it? How could he make anyone believe him? Despite the evidence, Lucas found himself plagued by doubt. Maybe he had read about the missing teenagers somewhere and forgotten. Maybe his mind had filled in the gaps, creating a story that felt real but wasn't. But then he would remember the fear in Sarah's eyes, the desperation in Mark's voice, the hope in Danny's words. He would remember the entity, the chase, the portal, and he would know deep down that it had been real. He just didn't know what to do about it. Lucas sat in his room, staring at the photo of Sarah, Mark, and Danny. He could still hear the hum, faint but persistent, in the back of his mind. He didn't know if he would ever find the answers he was looking for. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real, that the back rooms were still there, waiting, just beyond the edge of reality. And sometimes, in the quiet moments, he swore he could still hear the hum, because somewhere out there, Sarah, Mark, and Danny were still waiting. Let me know in the comments what you think really happened to Sarah, Mark, and Danny. Do you believe the backrooms are real, or is it all in Lucas's head? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss another chilling story like this one. Until next time, stay curious, and maybe stay out of abandoned labs.